Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to talk about a major prediction that has been talked about for a while, and I want to look at this astrologically to see if I make the same prediction that's out there. So, what is this prediction that I'm talking about? It is that there has been some major predictions about there being a huge tsunami earthquake in Japan in the month of July. So here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that there is a psychic in Japan, and her name is Ryo Tatsuki. And Tatsuki is a manga artist in Japan, and she wrote this book called The Future I See. And in this book, she has made many predictions, and to this date, I believe she's put 15 major predictions out, and 12 of them have come true. So not all of them were accurate. So, but let me just say this, these odds are super high. And what's happening is that she predicted that this tsunami would hit Japan in July, and most people say that she just said the month of July. But there has been talk that she has said that it was July 5th. And there has been talk that she said, she even gave the time. But what I do want you to know about this time, I went through this, and it's been said that it was actually the time that she had the dream, which was 4:18 a.m. So I don't think that that's the time, since that was the time it said that she had the dream. Now, before I get going, I always need to remind you guys to sign up for my free newsletter, because in this newsletter you will get all of my predictions, including this one, delivered to your email address absolutely free every week. So go to galacticcenter.org, sign up for my free newsletter, as well as while you're there, check out all the amazing offerings I have. One is to become part of my Patreon, which means you become part of my spiritual community. You get to talk with me live every week and join a membership with like-minded people. That's on my website. And the next thing I have to remind everyone about is my galactic planner. If you want to know what all these predictions that I'm giving for the world, for events, if you want to know how they're going to apply to you personally, this is what you need. Go to galacticplanner.com, and with this planner you will put in your personal details, and all of your personal predictions will be delivered into your calendar. It is so amazing. Check it out, try it out, galacticplanner.com. And another thing is, if this has inspired you to learn astrology, seriously want to learn astrology, I have the best online school called University of Vedic Astrology.com, and I have live classes every week on Zoom you can be a part of, as well as Semester 1 begins August 6th. So check it out. Go to University of Vedic Astrology.com. Now let's get going and see if I predict the same thing that Tatsuki is predicting based on the charts and astrology. And yes, so she wrote the book, The Future I Saw. And She said that this tsunami was the worst ever, that it took out 3/4 of Japan, of course affected Taiwan, Philippines, as well as China. So this is a catastrophic event. And this might even be just the thing that I'm talking about with July being so dangerous. Even though I think there's an array of events happening this month because there's so many transits going on. But the way that I make predictions, and I do my research in order to make my predictions, is I go back historically and see what happened during the last earthquakes to see if I can predict before. If the same similar things are happening again, then I make a very strong prediction that yes, it could happen again. So there is, and here's the thing. Let me just tell you right now. I think this is really a huge possibility. And to the point where since Tatsuki has put out this prediction, it has even affected the Japanese traveling. People going to Japan are canceling their flights like crazy. This is affecting really a lot of the economy even in Japan, because in Japan they are very attuned to prediction. And yes, they believe these things. So even looking at this, looking at this major prediction, so I wanted to know, are there other psychics or astrologers putting out such a radical, extreme prediction? So I Googled it on YouTube and actually ran across another video that talked about Jean Dixon. And Jean Dixon was a phenomenal psychic. As a matter of fact, when I tell my story about how I got into astrology, it was because of Jean Dixon. Jean Dixon was the astrologer psychic for many of the presidents, Roosevelt, Eisenhower. I mean, it goes way back, Nixon. And so many of her predictions, which were so specific, came true. Now, the story that I always tell is when I was a very small girl living in Dallas, Texas, the night before Kennedy came to Dallas, and I'm living in Dallas, it came on our TV. Jean Dixon was there. I'll never forget it. It was even on a black and white TV, and Jean Dixon begged Kennedy not to come to Dallas, or he would be assassinated. And my mother, who took my sisters out of school to go greet Kennedy at the airport, shook his hand, and 30 minutes later he was gone. So my thoughts with this was, how did that woman know? I wanted to know how Jean Dixon knew this. And I set out on a quest wondering about this. And my mother had a lot of astrology books around the house as well. So I got into this at a very, very early age because my thoughts were, what if Kennedy listened to Jean Dixon? Would the world be a better place? And you know, I always tell everyone, J.P. Morgan had an astrologer, and the saying that J.P. Morgan puts out, millionaires don't use astrologers, billionaires do. And I'll tell you why J.P. Morgan was so adamant about astrology and astrologers, because his astrologer, Evangeline Adams, told him not to get on the Titanic, and he listened. Look at how that changed his destiny. Can destiny be changed by listening to what the stars predict? My answer to that is yes. So I don't know if this can be prevented, but I think many things where we have choice ourselves can be prevented by listening to the predictions of what astrology is telling us. We can change this. The future is not set in stone, but we have free will. And because we have free will, this is another reason why not every prediction happens. I'd say 75 to 80% of predictions happen. And the reason why it's not 100% is because we have free will. We can change the trends, the momentum of where things are going if we wake up. So let me proceed and show you my findings on whether or not there is going to be a major tsunami that is going to hit Japan. And going back to what Jean Dixon said in her book, before I continue on, in Jean Dixon's book, she wrote a book before she died. And I'm not quite sure when she passed, but it was quite a while ago. She wrote this book, and she said in this book that there would be a catastrophic event that happens in the year of 2025. And here we are. So yes, let me get going and start showing you the charts that I use for Japan. And let me tell you about this chart as well. I was given this chart by my translator. For over 7 years, I had a Japanese website, and I would write predictions for Japan every month for 7 years. And yes, I did predict the event of the catastrophic earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan in March. It was actually March 11th, 2011. And we're going to study that chart. And one thing I will say about that warms my heart, and about prediction. I predicted that in my Japanese website the month before March, that there would be a major earthquake in the month of March of 2011. And I got so many kind and thankful and grateful emails from the Japanese thanking me for this prediction, because so many people had canceled their weddings and changed their dates based on my prediction. And I have to say, one of the Japanese that thanked me called me Jean Dixon. That was a great compliment. If he only knew how I honored her and followed her, and it made my work what I am today. So that was pretty amazing. So what we're going to do is, my translator gave me the chart for Japan, and we're going to look at that chart to see what and how I predicted it. And I want to show you something else. This is one of my older books, but this book I wrote in 2014, and it is Secrets of Prediction. It is basically about world prediction, world and personal cycles using Vedic astrology. And in this book, I gave the details and accounts for how I predicted that earthquake March 11, 2011 in Japan. So I'm going to scoot over here now. We're going to start looking at the charts to see if I surmise exactly what Tatsuki and I don't know that it's July for Jean Dixon. She just said 2025, but Tatsuki actually said July. And I thought we might even look at July 5th, although I want you to know I do see it the entire month. And let me show you the dates and times. So putting up these charts, first we're putting up the chart for Japan that I have, as well as the Japan earthquake that happened March 11, 2011. So let's compare these charts and see why I predicted this earthquake and why it happened most of all. So looking at this, I want you to notice, just looking at the Japan chart all by itself, which is November 3rd, 1946, the country had to regroup after World War II. And all of those planets being in Scorpio, in the first house, this is very important. And the place that I want you to focus in on throughout all of these charts I'm going to show you is where Japan has its natal Mars at 4 degrees of Scorpio. Now, let me plug in below that. This is the chart for when the major tsunami hit Japan in 2011. And I want you to zero in on where Rahu and Ketu are in this chart. So on that day, Rahu was 4 degrees of Sagittarius and Ketu was 4 degrees of Gemini. And you know what's very interesting, for those of you that have followed my work, you know how I always talk about Rahu and Ketu. Rahu is the north node of the moon, Ketu is the south node of the moon. They have a cycle where they stay in a sign for a year and a half, but they go through all 12 signs of the zodiac in 18 and a half years. And every time that Rahu is in Gemini and Ketu is in Sagittarius, there were catastrophic events. I go through them so many times, I'll just name them off every 18 and a half years. The one that I predicted because of this was COVID 2020. Going back 18 and a half years from that was 9/11. Going back from that was the AIDS virus. Going back 18 and a half years from that was Kennedy's assassination. And 1945 was the bombing of Hiroshima. But here's my point with this. Rahu is in Sagittarius and Ketu is in Gemini. So what I want you to know is this is the reversal of Rahu and Ketu. But when they go into these signs, this is when major catastrophic events do happen. So this was 2011. But going back to this, where Rahu and Ketu are, Ketu is at 4 degrees of Gemini. Rahu, of course, is for Sagittarius. They're always exactly opposite. Notice where Japan's natal Mars is. 4 degrees of Scorpio. So that means that Ketu was exactly aspecting Mars by a quincunx aspect. And let me just say, the quincunx to me is like one of the very worst aspects we can have. What is a quincunx? When planets are 8 or 6 placements from each other. The quincunx means Ketu is 8 placements or 6 placements from where natal Mars is. And if you count back around from where Mars is to where Ketu is, you'll arrive at 8 placements. So it's always a 6-8 or an 8-6 relationship. It's catastrophic. This aspect I always look for because, I mean, literally the 8th house rules death and the 6th house rules enemies and accidents. You put them together, that's the definition of a 6-8, 8-6 relationship, which in Western astrology is called a quincunx. Now, that's one thing we have going in this in this Japan earthquake. Now I want you to notice where Uranus is. Now Uranus and Neptune have actually been, what I have discovered, the greatest denominators, if you really look at it, for earthquakes. Uranus is sudden, unexpected events. So if you look at where Uranus is in this chart, during the tsunami, it sits at 5 degrees of Pisces, which is exactly at the midpoint of where Rahu and Ketu are. So you could call it a T-square, but whenever a planet goes to the midpoint of the nodal axes, Rahu and Ketu, it's a huge trigger of destiny. Uranus is sudden, unexpected events and rules. Earthquakes, they're sudden, they're unexpected. They're huge, difficult events, and that's Uranus. So that's another thing. And on that day, notice where transiting Mars sat, at 18 degrees of Aquarius. So now I want to show you something else very significant. And I remember this was the trigger that made me predict this earthquake. And that was, I noticed where Mars was on the day of that earthquake. It was 18 degrees of Aquarius. And so with it being 18 degrees of Aquarius, go to the Japanese chart and notice where Rahu and Ketu are in the birth chart for Japan. Rahu was 19 Taurus and Ketu is 19 Scorpio. That means that Mars is 1 degree in orb of being exactly at the midpoint of Rahu and Ketu for the chart of Japan. That's a huge trigger, along with Uranus being at the midpoint, squaring Rahu and Ketu on that day. And refreshing your memory, Ketu is exactly casting a trinal aspect to natal Mars in the Japan Japan birth chart. Mars sits at 4 degrees. Ketu on the day of the earthquake was as aspecting it. It wasn't a trine, excuse me. It was the quincunx. So moving on, there are some other things that made me predict this. So listen up here. The next thing I'm going to point out, look at where Neptune was. Neptune sits at 5 degrees of Aquarius. Therefore, Neptune is exactly squaring the natal Mars in the Japan birth chart. Remember what I said, Uranus and Neptune represent earthquakes. Neptune, I didn't know this because I was wondering why Neptune always came up in earthquake charts. It deals with Poseidon throwing his spear to the bottom of the ocean, which disturbs it and makes it shake and causes earthquakes. It's his trident towards the earth. And remember what an earthquake and tsunami are. A lot of times they're volcanic eruptions that happen at the floor of the ocean and everything shakes. So that's Neptune. One more thing, look at where Uranus is in the Japan earthquake chart. It sits at 5 degrees of Pisces. So both Neptune and Uranus are both 5 degrees. And Uranus is casting a trine to natal Mars in the Japan birth chart. Here's the thing, I found that when you get planets the same degree, regardless if they're a trine, a quincunx, a square, an opposition, they connect the planets. And you take the meanings of what the planets are. So this connection is Uranus connecting to Mars. Earthquakes, sudden events that are violent. So that covers this chart. And one more thing I do want to add, Neptune for the Japan earthquake chart. If you'll take Neptune and you'll plug it into the birth chart for Japan, and where Mars and the Sun are, they're in the 4th house of the Japan birth chart. The 4th house represents the homeland. It's home, it's land. So that covers why I predicted a major earthquake before it happened for Japan on March 11th, 2011. I have another chart. There was actually another chart, or another earthquake, I should say, that was considered even worse than the one in 2011. So I found that. And let me put that chart up and see if I see any similarities. This particular earthquake happened September 1st, 1923. And looking at this, let's put this across the chart for Japan and see if we see anything likewise happening. So this worst earthquake, I find it so interesting that look where Ketu is and Rahu. Rahu sits at 18 degrees of Leo and Ketu sits at 18 degrees of Aquarius. Does this ring a bell at all? Of course it does, because it is exactly square where Rahu and Ketu are in the birth chart for Japan. Notice Rahu is in Taurus and Ketu is in Scorpio, and they are within a degree of being exact. Remember, you can give things a 3-degree orb. I call that exact. But 1 degree, it's on the money. Okay? So really, what is this? Basically a grand cross covering all the fixed signs. Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio, and Leo. So that's the main thing I saw going on with this. Now there's some other things. So 1918 degrees marks the spot because on the earthquake that happened March 11th, 2011, remember Mars was 18 degrees of Aquarius. Now I know this is an event chart for when the 2011 earthquake occurred. But what that tells me is that is a sensitive degree. And I got news for you. These degrees are about to be activated again. That's what I really, really want you to know. So, looking at this, the worst earthquake that happened in 1923 had all these planets in Leo, and particularly Rahu. Do you know what we have right now? We have Ketu in Leo right now and Rahu in Aquarius. And yes, going back to that worst earthquake in Japan, Uranus was within a few degrees of Ketu. A little wider orb, but still, Uranus was involved with the nodal axes of Rahu and Ketu in 1923. But here's another thing. Mars was in Leo in the 1923 chart. Guess where Mars is now? So right now, what we're looking at, we have Mars and Ketu in Leo. And let me just tell you, they're there now. And Mars and Ketu are coming together by July 20th. They will be exact at 25 degrees of Leo. Now, let me give you the chart of, I'm going to call it the big tsunami. And this I put in July 5th, but in reality, I'm seeing throughout this month it could happen. But July 5th, let's see if we see anything specific. And let me tell you all the things I'm seeing. It is amazing how many things are here. First of all, transiting Mars is in Leo. And by the time, and it's going to be 15 degrees of Leo. And in the worst earthquake, all those planets were in Leo. As a matter of fact, Uranus being there in Aquarius, that's a big trigger. So I'm talking about that earthquake that happened in 23. So Mars was in that chart in Aquarius. And no, it was in Leo. I take that back. But in 2011, Mars was in Aquarius, which is the opposite of Leo. So there's this big axis going on between Aquarius and Leo. I hope you can follow me because I have some other very simple things that predicts this month. And it is, let me pull up, if you will notice where Uranus and Venus sit. I'm looking at the July 5th, 2025 chart. They sit at 5 degrees exactly together in Taurus, which means they are exactly within 1 degree opposing Mars in the Japan chart, the birth chart. Furthermore, continuing on, I'm looking at the fact that July 12th, Mars will be 19 degrees of Leo, which means it's exactly aspecting that nodal axis from the Japan chart. So it will be at the midpoint. Mars will be at the midpoint of Rahu and Ketu when it hits 19 degrees. That's July 12th. So anytime then. Now here's another thing. Neptune will station. That means it's going direct and it's going to start to turn retrograde by July 4th and 5th. Here it is. This is July 5th. Neptune rules earthquakes. And when a planet stations, it is more powerful than ever. It's like 100 times magnified. And then by about a week later, July 12th, Saturn stations. And what's going on with Saturn is exactly conjunct Neptune. So Neptune and Saturn are stationing at 7 degrees of Pisces. Pisces is the ocean floors. Pisces is the ocean. And with them stationing together within a week represents something catastrophic under the water. And not to mention They are very tight with the fixed star called Sheet that represents sorrow and tragedy and shipwreck. It deals with the oceans. So now I'm extending this from July 4th and 5th all the way to July 12th, where Mars will trigger the nodal axes transiting Mars. But then again, really with Uranus being 5 degrees, opposing Mars, it's here. Everything's here. Now, if per se, we don't have an earthquake, and here's another thing, on July 5th, I forgot, Mars at 15 degrees of Leo exactly squares the ascendant in the Japan chart at 15 degrees of Scorpio. This is exact. But then again, July 20th, when Mars and Ketu come to 25 degrees of Leo, exactly conjunct, notice where the moon is in the Japan chart. 25 degrees of Capricorn. So this Mars-Ketu conjunction are exactly in a quincunx with the natal moon for Japan. 6-8-8-6 relationship, which that is huge on that day too. So here's the thing, I'm seeing the whole month of July. It could happen absolutely by the stationing of Saturn, Neptune between the 3rd and the 5th of July. Then again, I'm looking at the 12th. Then I'm looking at the 20th. The month of July is the time. No wonder Tatsuki didn't really say a day. She said July. It is really radical. Now, if per se, let me scoot over here. If per se, nothing happens, which I can't imagine, but not everything's set in stone, thank goodness. I see another critical time in December. And particularly I'm looking at December 17th through the 20th. Why? Because Uranus will be exactly opposed natal Mars in the Japan chart. And December 20th, Rahu and Ketu. This will be when Rahu and Ketu are at 18 and 19 degrees of Aquarius, Leo. That is where I think it was during the worst earthquake. It's just they were reversed. Yes, in 1923. Rahu was in Leo and Ketu was in Aquarius. But on July 20th, Rahu will be in Aquarius and Ketu in Leo, exact. So there will be this grand cross kicking in. And yes, so this is really dangerous. So I say take caution. If you're in Japan, go inland. And pay attention to the specific dates I gave. And what are they? July, there's a lot of them. I think the whole month. Because sometimes things are within a degree orb. Yes, I'm just going to say the whole month, but I was leaning more towards July 3rd through the 5th, July 12th, July 20th, and those are the biggies. But remember, things don't have to be exact. They can be within a degree. We've seen it so many times, and I think I proved my case, my point. What I was trying to do is prove that what happened before is happening again. Therefore, I think the results will result in a catastrophic earthquake. So take caution, take cover, take heed, and remember, we need to know these things to prevent problems, just like when everyone listened that watched my website where I wrote my predictions back in 2011. People didn't plan things on that month, their weddings, their parties, anniversaries. They postponed it, and boy, they were glad they did. So it's not the end of the world, but it is going to be another major big earthquake. So thank you for listening. If you would like more information on me, just remember, go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org, and you will find everything there, even a link to connect to my university website if you're wanting to study with me, become my student. But that website all by itself is universityofvedicastrology.com. Thank you.